Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us and welcome to another episode of GameDay Essentials on Twitch. I am Scott Ward, Solution Architect with Amazon Web Services today, and I am joined by several individuals today. We'll start here on my right. We have
Joe Fontes, Solutions Architect, Amazon Web Services, and good to be back with you, Scott. Thanks for having me on again.
Good to see you again, Joe. Thank you. And managing the Twitch stream and your chat master today, we have
David Potes. So I'm a SA manager. So I've destroyed every shred of my tech cred. But yeah, try to kind of get it back here a little bit. And awesome. We've got a great show for you guys today. So we are going to dive into the world of dollars and cents, and hopefully it's more cents than dollars. And we're going to talk about cost optimization. And you'll see up on the screen some stuff about auto scaling, and a lot of what you do around optimization is going to be about your scaling policies. Super excited to be here. This is our ultimate episode. So if you saw the murders and the penultimate episode, we're following the Game of Thrones story arc. So one of us will be dead at the end of the show. I do not promise you.
And also, as an update, just for current events, Dave, myself, and a number of our team will be at the Jenkins World Conference tomorrow in beautiful San Francisco, California. So pretty excited about that. We've got it's a CI/CD presentation, which kind of goes back to some of the previous topics we were talking about at GameDay, and we've got a demo and everything. Very talented individual, Aaron, on our team put together the demo. If it works, I'll try to take full credit, and if not, I can't believe Aaron messed it up. So
if you guys are going to be there, I recommend you come up with the most hardest questions you can think of, and make sure you ask those of Joe. Try and play Stump the Band while they're on stage.
No. So Dave has to earn back his tech cred. So ask him.
I don't know if that's possible. But we'll see what happens.
So let's take a minute and kind of set the stage with what we're doing here for GameDay Essentials. So if you're a returning audience member, this will be a repeat for you. If you're brand new, kind of pay attention here. So what GameDay is it's an AWS event that we run at various AWS events, whether it be summits or reInvent, as well as we've been doing it for some customers privately as well. And the theme of it, GameDay, is it's your first day on the job at this amazing company, Unicorn Rentals. The past team that built an application that you are supporting has unfortunately left. Usually it's for a digital currency venture. Sometimes it's for something having to do with cat pictures. But bottom line is the entire team left on the same day, and you don't have those people who built the application available to you anymore. So you're on a team, not only of yourself, but usually of brand new people that you haven't met before. And you have responsibility for supporting that application that this other team made. You've got generally a crazy runbook that is maybe V1, that most of the revisions are actually done in pen. Versus an actual change to the documents. You've got that thing to kind of figure out what's truth and what's fiction. You've got an AWS account that's actually supporting the application. You need to figure out what's in that account and what's right, what's wrong with that architecture, where could I make it better? You're receiving traffic. So you're actually responsible for actually maintaining a live application. And there's this really cool scoreboard that will allow us to rate and grade all the teams and give you some bragging rights throughout the day. So it's an awesome, fun event, but a lot of pressure and stuff as well, and a lot of different things you need to focus on. When we last talked about GameDay Essentials, we had a quick summary of last week. We talked about security. In a quick summary, security, we talked about various things. We talked about CloudTrail. Spent a lot of time on IAM, which is very important even for GameDay as far as how you control and pay attention to what people are doing. Some more advanced concepts around how you might do some security analysis at scale. But the bottom line is, it's important to make sure that you kind of figure out how you can factor security into what you're doing, even at an event like GameDay, because it can come back to bite you at the end of the day if you don't have some sort of a security-focused angle towards what you're doing, even in an event like GameDay.
Yeah, so Dave, you missed it last week. DMX hacked into our account.
What happened?
Yeah, DMX hacked into our account. The rapper. I know. I don't know where he came from. He just came out of nowhere. And I checked IAM, and he's still in our account. So
you tried barking at him?
We got to work on our OPSEC, man.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, it's job 0, so I don't know if we can move it off the list.
Yeah, I don't know, man. He's pretty lead.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll keep an eye peeled for those lead folks. So it's a good background, Scott, and I think one of the things that I think is really interesting is I kind of liken it to changing the engine on the 747 while you're in the air, which is just like real life. Like rarely do you get like a greenfield opportunity.
Yeah.
I know, Joe, you've got some stuff on the screen. Do you want to talk about what we're looking at? Or?
Sure. Whenever we look at like cost optimization, specifically as it relates to GameDay, I always think back to, what is it that we did before, right? When we're looking at how much infrastructure do I need, I always, I pulled up a graphic here that I always love. And this kind of shows that even though your traffic is variable across whatever it is that you're hosting, prior to something like AWS, you'd always need a baseline level of provisioning that would cover both the peaks and valleys, and so you're always provisioning for the highest level of necessity, kind of plus like a 10% margin of error, so that you can have a few machines go down, lose a few instances here and there, and so as you can see here, there's quite a bit of waste that takes place. Especially between nights and weekends and times when you don't need all of this capacity, and so kind of moving into what could we do to take advantage of these drops in traffic, and how can we save some of the costs there. This really and how that applies to GameDay is what we're going to be looking at today.
Yep.
And, one of the things that, people always do when they start a GameDay is they say, okay, well, I need to do X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to start up, 10 instances to make sure that I can meet the demand of that traffic. Right. And, that's a quick way to the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
Right. The free is not free, right?
Exactly. The provisioning from peak right from the get-go. And so certainly, every GameDay is a little bit different. But in general, you're earning points on the scoreboard, but there's a cost for the infrastructure that you're actually using. It may not be exactly the same as as you might see for that infrastructure in your own AWS accounts, but we are charging you for the infrastructure that you're using. So that there is a cost element to GameDay, and it's important that you're paying attention to that. And just what Joe said. Is it really the best approach to just launch everything and hope that I'm ready to go? For something that's going to happen 5 hours from now, or do I need to really wait and see? And do I need to wait and see until the issue happens and then take an approach, or do I need to have some sort of a mix of approaches to there? So
so it's pretend like you're paying this bill, right? So you've got this AWS bill, and you're running instances that you definitely don't need. I know I personally never have any waste in my account.
Okay.
Even though I run one website, and so it's very expensive. I personally don't have waste. I'm just saying for those who might.
I think there's always a fat
100% efficient over here.
Yeah, exactly. Like anybody that says they're 100% efficient is feeding you 100% efficient. Yeah, he has a bridge to sell you.
Yeah.
There's always some fat.
Yeah. When it comes to GameDay, we generally give you a few restrictions just because of the type of event we're running. You only can run maybe some T2 micro or T2 small instances, and you're generally limited to the number of instances that you can normally run by default in that region. But there's still enough going on in those games where you can definitely be thinking about cost. So if we think about cost, there's lots of different services and things we could certainly be looking at and talking about. But there's a couple of different costing mechanisms, I guess I would say, that you can kind of apply when it comes to AWS, and we're going to touch base on these. But there's on-demand, reserved, and spot are the three ones, and then we kind of mix free tier into that a little bit as well. And so on-demand obviously being where you pay by the hour, reserved where you're making more of an upfront commitment and you're getting access to reserved capacity for a period of time. Spot where you're bidding on unused capacity that exists in the AWS ecosystem. And one of the really interesting things that when it comes to cost is the free tier. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the free tier, where if you can use 750 hours of EC2 for a year with these smaller instance types. But there's actually a really cool perpetual free tier that exists for a lot more of our services now. For example, Dynamo, you can have 25 gigs of storage and 25 read and write throughput at any point in time. Every month it's perpetual. Lambda's got a perpetual one. Some of the other services do. So there's actually a cool thing that you can actually start building into your cost architecture. You start looking at what some of those services offer when it comes to free tier as well. But let's start off with we have a good starting architecture that we wanted to kind of use to help drive our discussion here. It's a basic architecture. Some of you have played along with us in our other episodes. You'll probably find this familiar. We've got a load balancer and an auto scaling group with some instances that exist in different availability zones, and we feel pretty comfortable. We've got a highly available application and instances. But when we look at this, Joe and Dave, I'm going to ask you.
Yes, put us on the spot.
Yes, please. What would you say are some of the implications of just like saying, hey, calling it good and saying, I've got an auto scaling group, it scales up and down in metrics, and I'm all good. Like, what are some of the things that could maybe still bite you when it comes to cost for something like this?
Yeah, there's a classic gotcha here, and I've seen it. You want to manage when you scale up and scale down, right? That's really the key. If you do it too quickly, you can end up almost thrashing. And remember, if you have something that's getting terminated, you're still paying for the full hour, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so you don't want to have things that are being terminated for whatever reason, a minute into that cycle. And if you have your scale up and scale down policies so tight that they're going to go up and down very quickly, you can end up, shoving your dollars and cents right out the window. So know your scaling metrics. That's the first one. Joe, you got a second one?
Setting a baseline architecture. So, if you know that you're always going to want at least 2 instances or 10 instances, take advantage of reserve pricing there, since, it is so much cheaper just to go with that pricing model. You're always going to have the same 4 baseline instances running. Definitely have that as an opportunity. And, non-cost related, something that just kind of, I hear every once in a while, often enough to bring it up, is have some sort of centralized session management technique. Because as instances are added to auto-scaling groups, as they're removed to auto-scaling groups, there's a little bit of confusion about how the session persistent information is transitioned between instances. And so use something like, Memcache or Redis or something. We talked about it, I think, the week before, but just as kind of a reminder, because we run into that every so often.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, so I think if I'm going to summarize what I kind of heard here from Dave's side is, pay attention to the metrics you're using to scale up and scale down. Make sure that you're actually scaling with a policy that will actually allows you to understand that you actually have scaled correctly and that you're not tearing things up and tearing things down. Maybe your metrics are too tight, too rigid. They need to be maybe spread out a little bit or have more of a cool down period to make sure that you're okay before you scale up again. Or down, so that you're maximizing the efficiency of your architecture. And then, for Joe's, we talked about reserved instances and the ability to kind of pay up front for that capacity. If you know that you need 2 instances running at all times and you've established that baseline, maybe pay up front for some reserved instances and then you just offset your additional usage with auto scaling. One of the interesting things, though, is that it's not just a one-time effort, right? You don't just launch a brand new application and 3 years later assume that you're still going to need the minimum, right? You're probably going to, maybe if your business is growing, your application is more popular, you're probably going to maybe need 4 instances now as your minimum and stuff. So there's an opportunity or a best practice to go back and actually reevaluate your usage and say, hey, we've grown as a company, we actually use more of this infrastructure and it's always on. Maybe we should be buying more reserved instances. And
Can you go back to the chart that we had?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So we've got the screen now. I promise people charts. Okay, so this will pop up for you guys on the screen, hopefully. There we go. Okay. So this is your baseline, right? And if you want to do a very conservative baseline, you could try to hit like those valleys. But you probably want to go a little bit higher than that, for reserve and that sort of thing. But this is how you can measure your capacity and understand what you actually need. And Scott's point is spot on. That this is not a set it and forget it kind of thing. If you're doing the right things, hopefully your business is growing, right? It can be going up, but also you may have an application that is reaching sunset or retirement, like I hope to someday. And maybe needs a little fewer resources. So always, make sure that you know how to shrink as well as grow.
Yep. Yeah. And kind of the last thought I'd leave about this, when we plan for capacity and specific to reserved instances is, this is not this is done at scale with large companies. It's actually a regular exercise. We did a webinar a couple of years ago with Adobe and Cloudability, where Adobe does it on a monthly cadence. It's 26 every month. They're looking at what their reserve capacity looks like for the next month. So it can be a discipline, and it can be somebody's regular job if you're really using this stuff right. Now David used a keyword spot just a couple minutes ago, and another, one of the pricing models we talked about was spot instances, and I think it's an interesting architectural pattern when you start looking at how can spot instances actually work into my architecture. As you probably know, spot instances are things that you can bid on unused capacity in the EC2 ecosystem. It's significantly lower prices than you might find on the on-demand instances, but if somebody bids a higher price for you, we're going to take that instance away from you with about 2 minutes notice. So it's a little bit of a scary thought that you might lose your infrastructure. So people don't always see it as a mechanism for maybe a steady state workload, but I actually feel that there's some opportunities there. We've actually, if we want to bring up that diagram, Joe, we'll walk them through the console in a sec. There's actually an opportunity to maybe create an architecture that might look like this, where you actually are running multiple auto scaling groups for your application, where you have a mix of spot and on-demand auto scaling groups, where the spot instances are taking the primary and then the on-demand are taking up the slack. Do you guys agree with that? You've seen that before?
Well, I take a slightly different approach. Okay. What I do is I go to AWS Loft events and just get free AWS credits and apply that to my infrastructure. And I find that it works even better than Spot.
Yeah, and if you hit us up at shows, you can probably get some credits
you've got to sit through a few presentations, but I find that price comes in lower than Spot. So, if you're ever near a Loft event, hint, right?
Or Jenkins World.
Or if you found yourself at Jenkins World in San Francisco, California tomorrow.
You know where to find us. No, I think this is a really good pattern, and I honestly think it's a killer pattern. What you want to do is, I'm going to use the classic weasel words here and say your mileage may vary, right? But understanding, what's your basis point for on demand, and then being really smart about spot. That there's a ton of stories out there about how people have saved just ridiculous amounts of money using spot in smart ways, and we have some great partners too. So. I know you've worked with Spotinst.
Especially in pharmaceutical research, genomic research. So those were the original workloads where Spot was just highlighted as a really great piece of the puzzle, to where you've got just, tens of thousands of instances chomping away at a workload. And it doesn't matter if you lose a few here and there, you can adjust your price as necessary, but, you're always working with batches like thousands of instances. And so that was really the original workload. But then after that, we've seen, the usage of Spot really transition from, those batch workloads where we don't care if we lose instances here and there to running standard web architectures, with things like Spot Fleet and different partner solutions as well.
Right.
I think Scott will love to tell you about Spot Fleet and Spot capabilities. Look at this. There's a blog post. This is my self-plug of the day, trying to drive traffic to my blog post here.
You say that like it's singular. This is actually your second plug, so.
Who's counting, right?
Okay.
Dave's counting.
I actually had that role. Yeah.
Nobody would have noticed it wasn't for Dave. But here we have a blog post with a partner called Spotinst. And this is a really cool one. If you guys want to check it out, we have this walks through how to set up a demo with Spotinst to utilize Spot instances to run your web application. And this is just cool because it gives you an idea of kind of the monetary savings that you can see with something like Spot. There's a graph at the bottom somewhere. I thought there was. Yeah, there we go. So there's just graphs that kind of show here's what you would have spent using standard on-demand instances. Here's what you saved using something like Spot. And these same principles apply with standard AWS service solutions like Spot Fleet, to ensure that you have a baseline number of instances running. It's just there's just been a lot of change in the ideology behind Spot. What was once workloads that you don't care whether or not they finish in a certain time. now we're seeing it with mission critical workloads.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we're gonna dive into some of that setup here, but I want to make sure everybody who's joined us recently that this is Game Day Essentials, where we take you and walk you through various aspects and methodologies that apply to an AWS Game Day event, so you're familiar. And then we take it a little bit further and maybe help you see some additional topics that might apply to your actual job and things you're doing on AWS. So back on Spot, Joe, let's go in and show people how we maybe set up that auto scaling group that we talked about, or a couple of auto scaling groups that were mentioned in our architecture diagram. So we've actually got in this top secret account that we have, we've actually created a couple of auto scaling groups that deal with the Spot and the on-demand world in that architecture. So if we look at the bottom auto scaling group, we've actually created an auto scaling group. So we created a launch configuration. When we went and created the launch configuration, we actually you say which availability zones and what price you're willing to choose. So it gives you what the current Spot price is, and you fill in what the Spot policy, how much you want to pay for Spot, and then it launched the instances based on the fact that I had chosen a Spot price high enough. The cool thing here, though, is that if we then go to the on-demand auto scaling group, we created, we launched it with no instances. We said we'll go up to 4. And the way we were able to accomplish that is if we go up to the scaling policies, scrolling up there.
Oh.
Just scrolling up on the...
I gotcha.
Yeah.
I think it's font size.
We created, what we did was we turned on, actually, let me show you one thing. If we go back up to there and look at the metrics, monitoring, sorry. There's you see where it says auto scaling metrics, it says disable group metrics collection. It actually, that's correct the way we want it. Normally it would say enable by default. And what that does is it actually starts feeding metrics to CloudWatch at the group level for an auto scaling group. So I actually set that to group level for both the Spot and the on-demand. And that'll allow us to do the scaling policy we're about to talk about. So if we then go back to scaling policies, what we did was we created a scaling policy. So every time that the group in service instances is less than 1 for 15 minutes, we actually will scale up. The cool thing here is that alarm is actually tied to the group in service instances metric for the Spot auto scaling group. So we actually have an alarm on the Spot side, but we use it as a scaling policy for the on-demand auto scaling group. So it's basically telling on-demand, hey, there's not enough instances in service in the Spot group right now, so please go ahead and scale and get us up to make up the difference. So it allows us to kind of have that shift from Spot maybe down to on-demand if there's not enough capacity or if the price has somehow gone up past our threshold. You could also throw some additional alerts in there that not only would scale, but would also tell you, hey, you don't have enough Spot instances anymore. You need to probably either revisit your pricing model or just say, you know what, it's temporary. We'll let the price go back down and we'll launch more Spot instances when it happens. So kind of up to you on how you actually, continue to triage that when that type of event happens. But the key thing I wanted to show everybody here is that it is possible to start kind of flexing and using multiple pricing models, and our services will allow you to kind of monitor and do that type of stuff. So I think it's a very cool thing. I'm anxious to find more use cases where we could actually try that out and see how it works. And I'm a big fan of it right now.
Yeah, no, I love when these new capabilities come out, just because it gets your mind working. Mm-hmm. What are the other workloads that I could shift to this type of infrastructure?
Mm-hmm.
How can I auto scale? My databases in this way. If you have something like, let's say, MySQL or MariaDB or something, read replicas that you're operating yourself. If you ran a bunch of read replicas on something like Spot instances, how could you horizontally scale your infrastructure? And that's a workload that a couple of years ago would have been unthinkable on something like Spot.
Mm-hmm. And that's an awesome segue, actually. We were going to talk about this next was, databases. So
can I pause you before you go databases? So Doug Toppin in the stream, some great tips. One thing that, and Timothy, he points out that AZ costs can vary substantially, so include AZs in your evaluation of where to request the Spot.
Exactly, yeah, that's a good point. We don't have it here, but when I went and set up that Spot, the launch config portion of that Spot auto scaling group, it actually says which here's the cost per AZ, and you have to pick a price point that's high enough for at least 2 of the AZs if you want to run highly available. So that's a very good point. It actually was a different price for each AZ. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Very cool. So I've worked in the database world for a long time, and it was just like big boxes, and you just would get a bigger box, and you would add more storage to those boxes for a database forever. That was how we scaled, and that scaling activity was often a 3 to 6 month exercise of ordering, waiting, getting somebody to do it, migrating over to the new box. It was painful, it was slow, it was part of our life for years and years and years. But there's some cool new things that have happened that have kind of really, taken the cloud and taken the best practices and the principles of the cloud and been able to make it work for databases. And I think, I personally think there's awesome opportunities for scaling at that database level and using that as a costing mechanism, not just an availability mechanism. And I'd start with DynamoDB. So that's a managed, our managed key value store. There's some interesting things with DynamoDB that have enabled some costing stuff recently. And Joe, are you familiar with the auto scaling or where the auto scaling that's come out for DynamoDB? Have you heard about that?
I have not.
Okay.
I heard tell of it earlier today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's actually it's very similar to the auto scaling we've talked about here. It's not exact, but you can actually scale up and scale down your read and write throughput based on activity that's happening. And as you may know, with DynamoDB, you get charged for how much you're provisioning for throughput. So you want to be able to make sure that you can service the requests of your users, but you don't want to over provision and pay too much, waiting for that big storm to come that may or may not happen. So auto scaling at the Dynamo level, people have done it before. They've written their own code to look at the metrics and cause those events, but this is more built into Dynamo now, and it allows you to actually kind of have those scaling metrics. I think it's not quite as exact as EC2. I think you're limited to how much you can do in 24 hours, and I'm not positive that will actually allow you to scale down. But definitely being able to scale up when you need to is an awesome new feature with Dynamo, and it's a great thing when it comes to cost.
Oh yeah, it's interesting. Back in the day, long before Raspberry Pis or anything like that, we used to always joke that we're going to run all of our MySQL secondaries on cell phones. So just plug in like an army of cell phones because they're powerful enough to just chug along and run the reports databases.
Isn't that a Silicon Valley episode?
Is it really? Oh, I don't know. Though I mean, this was long before Silicon Valley show. Yeah, right. No, all right. I'm taking credit. But yeah, I mean, so if you think about it, using T series AWS instances, using Spot, it kind of like is a call throwback to these ideas that we had so long ago, which is I just need the minimum amount of resources to complete this workload. I don't want to spend any money on it. What's the spare hardware that we have to run something like this, and making it easy. And so yeah, I'm going to say that they stole our cell phone idea.
That's great. So things to know about DynamoDB scaling. I'm going to start with theory and then get specific, but the theory on scaling is, it's designed for kind of periodic up and down, right? So if you go back to that chart that we showed, standard, I'm not saying show it, I'm just saying mentally,
Gotcha.
Standard kind of sine wave patterns, right? If you have a predictable up and down, maybe it's an e-commerce site, maybe it's a SaaS that's, very big in Asia or just North America or something like that. You have a periodic rhythm that so that's really good for that. If you think that things might go crazy, aka like a Super Bowl ad or something like that, that's where you want the DynamoDB Accelerator, DAX. And that's the caching, it's an in-memory caching mechanism for heavy read workloads. And you're right, there are some limits, Scott. So you can scale up with scaling as many times as you want. We make it easy to scale up. But you're limited to 9 scale downs per 24 hours as of right now. And this is actually super cool, something that we released in June of this year. So it's still pretty fresh. I'll drop a link in the chat.
So once again, pretty important to understand your scaling policies. You don't want to scale yourself so high that you're left in a position where you for another day you can't scale yourself down. So once again, understand kind of your traffic patterns. I know things happen. Sometimes you just have to scale because something weird happened. But test and play around with these policies is I think the message of the day when it comes to scaling for cost.
Yeah, it's the same thing with standard auto scaling too. Really pay attention to those scaling decisions. If you say, my baseline is 4 instances, every time we hit the limit of those 4, add another 4 instances. That's not the best decision. Maybe you should only add 1 instance, or maybe you should add 2. And how many are you taking out? Are you taking out 1 instance at a time, or are you dropping 4 out of the queue and just watching the CPU peg?
Yep. Good. Kind of on the database discussion as well, as I think another interesting thing is relational databases. As I mentioned before, that's where I've spent a lot of my time, and relational databases are traditionally known as vertical scaling beasts. But with the relational database service that AWS has, and it's kind of that wrapper around managing relational databases, there's actually some really cool opportunities to be able to scale or to take cost into the equation as far as how you run your databases. And Joe, you had a great example, talk about, things are different on the weekend versus the weekday, for example, so that you think about, a database that you've provisioned for peak, which is usually peak usage during the week. But, Friday at 5 o'clock, everybody's off to Chili's and having a good day. And
I'm more of an Applebee's guy.
Okay. And nobody really comes back till 7 a.m. on Monday. A few people log in and do work, but that database is way over provisioned for the weekend. And one of the cool things by taking that RDS service and wrapping it around the relational database engine is that you can actually interact with it and change the size of your instance, and in a matter of a few minutes, be able to resize that instance to still have a database up and running, but you're paying a lot less for that period of time. And so you're able to actually start having cost as a driving factor for what your architecture looks like at different points of the day for a lot more components of your overall application tier, and not just kind of the compute layer where you maybe have traditionally seen scaling be the most active item. So I think that's just amazing.
Yeah, it's the flexibility. I worked at a company where we had something like 80 read replicas running, and so those were during the day. Those were transactional read replicas, and then at night, that's when we ran cron jobs. That's when we ran nightly reports. And so, if you wanted a report done during the day, you'd have to take a couple of read replicas out of the production pool, get them away from processing transactions, so you could lock up the database by running a report. And then, it was a lot of manual intervention there, and it was kind of eyeballing and say, okay, well, transaction volume's a little bit lower today, so maybe we could add a couple more for reports, and our users can run their billing report during the day, which is magic.
Right.
And so that's one of the ideas where the flexibility of AWS says that you can do it all at the same time. You can run your reports, your crons, your transactions all during the day, and then scale it way down at night. We don't have to have all this hardware sitting on a shelf anymore. And so it kind of really changes, it changes, your decision parameters. It changes the amount of work that you have to put into it. And it really, just kind of changes how it is that you work and move forward.
Yeah, I agree. So Dave and Joe, one of the other kind of several of the buzzwords that we're hearing a lot these days, and I'm sure you'll hear them at your Jenkins conference tomorrow, are serverless.
The Jenkins conference in San Francisco, California?
I believe that's where it is.
That's where it was.
Yeah, I think it's at the Marriott Marquis. That's what I heard. Yeah.
Marriott Marquis, you say.
So a couple of the buzzwords that are out here these days are containers and serverless. And do you guys feel like there's some cost benefits to taking these? I mean, they're architectural because it's like, look, I can focus on my code more and I don't have to worry about infrastructure. But do you think there's a cost element that people could be looking at when it comes to these types of new technologies?
Oh, hell yes. For using containers, and I think ECS is a really good choice for that. Like, no duress there. It's the world's largest bin packing algorithm, right? You're taking things and shoving them all into the tightest spots that you can. So that allows you to be frugal in terms of over provisioning, kind of by default, right? So because you're packing everything in together, the amount of waste around the edges is much smaller. Now, for serverless, in this context, thinking about Lambda, and again, I'm going to use my weasel words. If your workload is well aligned to this model, you can save a fortune. The first 1 million executions every month are free, which is a pretty solid number. And then after that, what I like about it is if you think about, when you're doing auto scaling, it's a series of steps, right? And those corners of those steps are actually places where you may have too much capacity temporarily. Now, what I really like about Lambda and other serverless technologies is that relationship becomes a lot more linear, right? Because you're firing based on the actual execution of your workload, so you can very, very closely tie that to the actual usage and therefore your cost. But again, your workload needs to be there, and I'll keep using my weasel words. Joe, you have anything to add to that, or did I steal your thunder?
No, I'm just, so I started thinking about what are some of the first workloads that I moved to containers. And initially, they weren't the resource-intensive workloads. It was, maybe I needed a web app that spanned a couple of different instances for availability, but it regularly sits at, 0% utilization. Ordinarily, I would have put that web app on its own, maybe T-series or M-series instance, and I'd have to repeat that for each of the different web applications because I didn't want to kind of mix up the environments. Maybe they're different versions of PHP or Python or whatever it is. And so with containers, you can deploy them all to all the same instances. You don't have to mix environments. And so what I would have typically deployed, 20 instances to cover, these real lightweight web applications, I can now do with like 4 instances. And even if they're T-series, I just need them available for like a candlelight, just serve a few requests to like an auto scale type of deployment. And so I just thought it was funny that, when you think of the things that you could do with containers, and even when you go serverless, these really high performance, high value workloads. My first workloads were the ones that weren't doing anything.
So cron is a service, right?
Yeah. I mean, and also that, you wouldn't even notice if they were down necessarily, but guess what? They didn't go down.
I can't get the term candlelight auto scaling out of my head. You just said so.
It's a little bit less than pilot light, okay?
Oh wait, yeah. I always say that. I always say candlelight.
Yeah, well, it's how Abe Lincoln did auto scaling, so it's good. It's got a long and storied history.
It's steampunk auto scaling.
Yes,
there we go.
So I think the last thing I would add to that discussion before we move into some other things is, if you see, we talked very early on about, meaning today, with if your auto scaling is constantly like launching and tearing stuff down very quickly, depending on that particular workload, that might make a good fit for Lambda as well, or a serverless approach, because it's like you need access to a lot of resources on more of a spiky type pattern, and a Lambda type thing might be more appropriate for you to be able to kind of get that access versus trying to launch and bring up infrastructure all the time. So pay attention to that pattern as well as see if that might be a good fit.
I wish we had. So I had one slide that I tried to find and I couldn't find it. Kyle, the manager of the managers, the head of the horde, he put together this nice little comparison of running a website on EC2 versus I think it was ECS versus serverless, and what are the different cost comparisons? And the differences were striking. It was like on demand, maybe it costs you like $17 a month to run it on an on-demand instance, and then all the way down to serverless, it was something like I want to say it was like 18 cents for the month. Not a hugely trafficked workload, but still significant.
Yeah, definitely dollars and cents.
A lot of opportunities.
Yeah, and good call out from Doug Toppin in the chat. Don't forget that when you use serverless, you can reduce your monitoring, HA, failover, and so on. So, really good point there.
So some other trade-offs, like people who are doing those jobs could go do other things, or
you could fire them. I mean,
yeah. I mean,
the harsh realities of serverless are just been revealed to you.
Yeah.
So we've talked about cost and.
Or you can have them, actually dedicated to improving their application.
Yeah, more value. Yeah, that's right.
Learning something besides.
I'm just saying, there's another way to go.
Yeah. So, we talked about kind of looking at how you would architect with cost in mind, but there's also, just that on its own, you're making some shots in the dark, and I would expect that to really do this well, you probably need some tools. And the ability to actually visually see what your costs look like and how that's actually impacting you.
If you didn't go to the loft and get free proof of concept credits.
Yes, you just run based on credits. If you didn't have access to those credits, you might want to start actually paying attention to what your spend looks like. And so what Joe's brought up here is something that every AWS customer has access to is the billing and the cost management dashboard. I will make a plug that you actually can control this by an IAM policy. There's actually a default billing policy that you can attach to users. So if you enable this and you don't want people to have access to it, you don't give them that. If you want to have somebody just have access to this, you give them that. So you actually can control access to this dashboard is the first thing I'll say. But this is the default dashboard. It's showing spend month to date by your services. I don't know exactly how quickly this is refreshed, but it is relatively up to date. Showing us this month what our bill is more than likely trending towards. Since we're almost the end of August, this bill is going to stay pretty close to what it has. But it gives you that kind of first look of what's going on in there. And then you can actually dive.
Isn't this your account?
I don't know.
Oh, I was going to say, what are you doing for $2,000 there, Scott?
Well, I have many databases, but you'll see I've actually been trending down once we get into this a little bit more. So if we maybe go to there's a cost explorer, which is the next item, which AWS has done a lot of work to kind of enhance and give you more ability to kind of dive into your costs that you're running on AWS and get some better understanding of the things that you run and what it might be costing you, and see some trends over time. So you can see we've had a good trend here where the amount of infrastructure being paid for is less and less in this particular account. And I think if we even go to, we show them if you drop down, I think if you go up a little bit, there's if you go to the reports drop down, there's a bunch of pre-canned reports. Like if you look at the monthly costs by service, you'll see that this person's been doing an awesome job of paying attention and reducing their RDS usage over time, cleaning up a lot of unused stuff or finishing some projects. But the point here is that the Cost Explorer, for like a first start into understanding what's going on in your AWS account when it comes to the money, is the Cost Explorer. There's lots of pre-canned reports. You can put different filters in there. You can pick different regions. You can download this all. You can change the type of chart. You can look at it over a longer period of time or a shorter period of time. You can download it all as a CSV. If you really love Excel and want to model it in Excel or something like that, you can download that thing instead.
It almost looks like you've got some pretty standardized costs and you haven't gone with the reserved instances.
That is correct, yes. You this is an internal account.
This is why I don't use my account.
Yes. I'm willing to put myself out there a little bit here today for our end users. So
just treat him as your trusted advisor.
Yes. So that's that's the first couple things we talk about kind of costing in AWS. Another interesting thing that if we go back to the main console is if you go to the cost allocation tags. So we all know that tagging is a pretty advised best practice when it comes to running on AWS to tag your resources so that it's something meaningful. One of the cool things is that you can actually, you can factor these tags into your actual billing. So I've got some tags that I've used on infrastructure as far as cost center, customer name, and project that allow me to actually dig more into what is the costing specific to those tags. And some companies actually use those as a way to go into their financial system and reallocate costs for infrastructure to a particular cost center. Or if you're an MSP, you might track everything by project so that you know how to bill that particular customer that you might be doing something for. There's lots of different use cases. Everybody's going to have a different tagging strategy. That the advice we give you is to pick something and use it. EC2 can support up to 50 tags now, so there's no excuse for not being able to get the right level of detail.
Yeah, you're doing interdepartmental or interorganizational chargebacks. Put that organizational unit, right in the tagging capability, and this way you can just charge it back to that group.
Right. And if we show you, I think everybody's probably familiar with this concept called the detailed billing report that yes. Amazon can deliver. It's a CSV file that gets delivered to an S3 bucket. It's a great read, but this is just an example. So the detailed billing report, as we'll show you, is super detailed. It's going to tell you, you think that we just charge you for data transfer in and out and maybe on-demand usage, but we go super fine-grained into that and show you at a regular interval what those costs are. And the cool thing here is that the detailed billing report, because we've enabled those tags that you saw in the tag setup there, is you can actually see them in your detailed billing report. And once again, use your favorite tool of Excel to be able to allocate and examine who those costs are for and which type of cost, right? I think these particular ones are our data transfer on EC2, but you also have, if you go to the left a little bit, Joe, you'll also see that it's, just even usage for on-demand hourly rates and stuff like that. So a ton of flexibility to be able to analyze your costs if you're implementing some sort of a tagging strategy. Now, obviously this is a detailed billing report, and at scale, this may not be the best way to look at stuff. Right?
Yeah, I like to just eyeball this, and I could just, I could look at it's like the Matrix now. I could just look at this report and figure out, wow, I'm spending way too much.
Right.
No idea what that amount is, but I can tell you it's probably too much. Yeah.
What do you, so what do people do when they maybe becomes a little bit, this is not like a core concept for them, and things become too big? What do you see people doing when it comes to analyzing their costs at scale?
Yeah, so there's a lot of correlation that could be made within this document. If you notice, it's in a format that can be consumed by outside sources, can be consumed by you programmatically. But there's a lot of partner solutions that are built around helping you to better understand and correlate these costs. We work with a lot of the partners within the AWS partner ecosystem. Partners like Cloud Health, Cloudability, Cloud Checker, and what they do is they'll consume this information and apply it to your organizational strategy. So they'll look at, what tags are applied within, EC2 instances or within other resources, what tags are within their application that you've created. So let's say that, you've tagged all your instances as development or test instances, but within a solution like Cloud Health, you've said everything that's, tagged as dev, test, and staging goes to, the R&D department, something like that. So they really help you create an additional hierarchy, create additional decisions. You can load in your budget from other applications. If you're using Mass 90, Mass 500 as your accounting strategy, you can apply that budget to the decisions that you're making within AWS. And you can see, are we over projections, under projections? What's this looking like for the organization, and help you build your budget for next year to accommodate those needed resources.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and I can add to that too. If your Excel foo is lacking, which I don't love Excel. If your Excel foo is lacking, there's some tools that'll help you manage this too. So if you already have a tool like Splunk or Sumo Logic or Datadog or something like this, many of these tools will natively read your detailed billing report and produce all the fancy charts and graphs that somebody else wants to do for you. You also have partner tools like Cloudability, Cloud something,
Cloud Checker,
yeah. What informally CloudStar. But these are tools like designed to kind of help you manage that. And a lot of times, you could spend a lot of time, understanding this, or it may make sense to pay somebody else to do it. So definitely your call, but. The data's all there, right? We want you to have the data. And, I can't really underscore this enough. We don't want people to overpay for AWS, okay? We want you to pay for what you use. That's fundamental to our philosophy, fundamental to how we operate, and, be like Scott, cut back on your usage, wait, sorry, that was anonymous. So be like that one person and, see if you can do the same things with less, right? And joked about Canon people earlier, but really job security is all about continuing to show value, right? And what better way to do that than through cost things?
Yeah,
and I think we should core point of our position too as a partner solutions architect.
Right.
We're constantly trying to drop the cost that customers and partners are spending on AWS.
Yeah, we do a lot of cost optimization runs for people to advise them on some of these patterns, and this show is definitely an extension of that. It's we. Again, pay for what you use. That's what we want you to do. So, use lots of stuff, right?
But, whatever you want.
Yeah, but don't pay for waste, right? That's box land. That's the old school. That's the on-premises world, and cloud is tightly metered, and use that metering to your advantage.
And then what does this stuff even cost, right?
Credit.
Somebody's going to ask. Yeah. And then it's going to cost you 3 trips to the loft to watch Joe speak.
Yeah.
But you can get, so there was, relatively recently, I guess, you ever notice how 2015 doesn't seem like it was that long ago?
Yeah.
So anyways, I thought that
maybe as you get older that happens.
Apparently. Yeah. I don't know. Last time I looked, it was 2005. Apparently, quite a while ago now, which I thought was like last year, we released the AWS Price List API. And so here we have a programmatic way to consume AWS pricing information. So you'll notice that there's different versions of this. There's different dates offered. And so this is either a JSON or CSV format of did I use wget? Yes, I did. So this is a price list, a way to get a price list in programmatically to be able to consume and view the information. So if you just look for the index file, this is, as you would anticipate an index file, this gives you a location of different pricing opportunities for different services. So we have everything from, we have all the service capabilities here, and then we drill down into, what service pricing do we want? So like, let's say we're looking at EC2, which I already got, Yes. So once we've decided that we want pricing upon EC2 service information, now we get the EC2 service price list. And then from here, it's, okay, well, do you want the absolute latest, or do you want some kind of historical pricing? So let's say, you got your detailed billing report for 3 months ago, and you're saying, why is it that this costs this amount? You can go back in time and say, okay, well, what was the price of this EC2 instance size and family 3 months ago? And so we have an example of what that looks like.
Which, by the way, keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously not you, Mr. $3,000 in RDS. Not that, I obviously spend like $5, but, and so here's an example of what is the cost associated with running, this family of EC2 as of this date and that version. And so, we're looking at a DX2.extra large. And so you can get like historical, latest information and programmatically apply that to, your price models, your cost models. Mm-hmm. And you can actually look at it and say, what is the price trend for AWS? Are T-series going up or down in price? We went from, T1s to T2s. What was the price model there? Mm-hmm. Maybe forecast what you're going to see in the future. There's a lot that you can do once you have programmatic access to data. Yeah. And this is available via JSON or CSV.
Cool. Yeah, another awesome way to kind of programmatically pay attention to price with your architecture. That's very, very cool, Joe. I heard the term budget thrown out there a few minutes ago, and we won't really dive deeper into this, but if we, in that billing console that Joe was showing earlier, you actually do have the ability to now define budgets within your AWS account. And so you can actually say, by AWS service, this is my budget of what I want to spend for this particular period. You can even have an alarms that will then generate to you once you come within maybe a percentage of that budget, or you go so much over that budget. So if you're really trying to track costs by that, we'll never. The idea is that you probably don't want to just stop people and not allow them to do stuff. But if somebody does something that takes you beyond your budget, you probably want to be able to know about that and go talk to them and figure out what's going wrong. Maybe your budgeting's wrong, or maybe people don't have too much access and they're kind of willy-nilly doing things. So budgets are definitely there. And another cool thing is within CloudWatch, you can actually create an alarm on your overall usage of your AWS account and say, I want to get a notification when I hit $10,000, for example, to know when you've hit your overall spend. And that just might be a trigger of like, okay, I usually get that trigger around the 25th of the month. We're looking okay. But if I get it at the 5th of the month,
trigger warning.
What's happening, right? I need to dive into that. I personally, on my personal account, not my AWS account, but on my personal account, I have a very low threshold. I don't use it a lot. It's like set it at 2 cents. And seriously, because it's just, I've got some stuff stored in S3, but S3 is so cheap I don't have to use it. So But I actually have a billing alarm that on my own, so I know if I've done something wrong or if something's happened with my own internal account that I need to go in and quick, because it's my money and I don't want to spend it. So it usually just goes off whenever I renew a domain name, because I have a tendency to buy domain names and just hold on to them. But it's
so you're a squatter?
Yeah, I am a squatter.
All right, cool.
Here he is. I found him.
Yeah.
I intend to use them though. But it's an awesome little tool to just kind of quickly keep track of your costs, especially if you're just starting out and you want to add value and you want to build stuff, but you don't want to just spend the whole farm on AWS. It's a great thing to do there as well.
There's security implications too. One of the indicators of compromise is that you start seeing activity in regions you don't use, or B, you see activity that's generating a lot of cost. That where's folder that the hackers set up inside your S3 bucket, like that suddenly can start costing you. And one of the indicators, could be a budget alert.
Mm-hmm. And this is where you start to see patterns of how different services interact with each other and how they relate. I think it was last week or the week before we talked about using AWS config with config rules, where if you're in a development department, you probably aren't using anything more than a T-Series instance, and if you are, let's generate an alert. And so that goes back to that same concept. Mm-hmm. You got to make sure that they're only using certain size instances, therefore billing can't get too crazy. If there's an account compromised and a GPU instance is started up within a developer account, that should trigger a warning. And so creating multiple layers so that you can ensure that things are flowing as they should.
Right. Very cool. The last thing I'd like to touch base on before we kind of come up to the sad ending of this episode is consolidated billing. So some of you may have multiple AWS accounts today. It's actually almost a best practice. We don't want people to try and hammer and slam everything into one account. It doesn't make sense. You might even just be using a prod, dev, and test type account. And one of the things that exists today is consolidated billing, where you can actually link all of your accounts under one master account. And what that allows you to do is actually get your bill for multiple accounts up to one account. That detailed billing report we showed you will still show you all the accounts that the billing's for. So you still have the visibility in an account level, but you can get it in one spot, which is very cool.
But Scott, isn't consolidated billing just for the big guys?
No. You don't have to be Coke. You don't have to be Netflix. You could be Bob's Tackle Shop down the street who's got a dev and a production and account. You could still do consolidated billing. And one of the cool things that it gives you is, one, like I said, it gives you the visibility in one spot of what's going on in all your accounts. You can take advantage of tiered pricing. So some of our services have tiered pricing like S3, where the more you spend, the less it costs. That all applies up to that, all the accounts that are under that one master account. And reserved instances can actually be applied against multiple accounts. Reserved instances, at the end of the day, it's just a billing construct. You could buy reserved instances in your master account, and they will actually apply to whatever accounts are running that type of configuration in your account. So there's lots of use cases. You don't have to be the big guys doing that to be able to take advantage of it. So
you think Bob's Tackle Shop has a dev and test environment?
Probably not, but it's the only thing that came to my head.
I think Bob should, though.
Bob should.
It's a great way to isolate things.
I'm just saying, I feel like Bob is the type of individual that would probably make changes in production. I don't know, maybe I'm stereotyping. I'm just
probably
just throwing that one out
PHP
there
as well.
Oh.
Yeah. Ooh, you took the bait. Nice.
That's why his shop is a success.
Yes. So let's kind of come to a conclusion here. I'd like to give Dave or Joe, not to put you on the spot, but any last things that you want to
Any last words?
Last words before we decide who gets voted off the island?
Yeah, I mean, I do have last words. One, thank you everybody who stuck with us for 1 through or 2 or even 6 episodes. Really appreciate it. Love your support. 2, we're talking about doing other shows. So feel free to drop us a line. I think our Twitter handles are in the little graphics logos. Probably the best way to hit us up if you have ideas for shows or stuff you'd like to learn about. Big thanks to Scott and Joe, for really doing cool things here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thanks, Dave, for helping get this all organized and off the ground as well. So
now I can use
I'm feeling nostalgic. I mean, we've done live from New York, live from Seattle. I'm a Twitterer now. So at
Yeah, that's how often you Twitter.
Yeah. No, it's like I think it's like Joe Danger Fontes or Joseph Danger, Joe Danger Fontes, I think, is my Twitter handle. So, I've got upwards of like 20 followers. So I'm kind of a big deal.
That's
now.
awesome. Very
Nice.
cool.
Yeah.
I thank everybody for sticking around. I mean, I'd love to come back and do an episode of VI versus Emacs and tabs versus spaces and kind of let the audience run wild. So
I don't know.
we'll see
That's
what
a knife
happens
fight
there.
right now.
Sounds like a knife fight. Yeah.
But it's awesome. It's a sad farewell to this one, but I'm sure you'll find us back. Hopefully our contracts get renewed and we're able to come back and do this another time. But really thank everybody for tuning in and putting up with us. Hopefully you've walked away with at least one tidbit that you can take back and apply to your real world. And if we see you out at a future game day, some of this stuff will kick in and make sense. If you do come out to a game day, just grab us, tell us you watched. We'd love to hear what your thoughts were on it and how it helped you. So everybody have an awesome day. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you might be. And thanks for coming out, and we'll talk to you later. See you later.